Templars. 7 psychological tricks that made the Order unstoppable. In a world ruled by steel, fire, and fear, a single order rose from the dust of Jerusalem and rewrote the laws of war without ever needing to draw blood first. Imagine an army so disciplined that kings hesitated before even speaking their name, so mentally unbreakable that entire kingdoms reconsidered marching against them, and so strategically silent that even their presence felt like a warning carved into the air. These were the Templars, warriors who understood that battles were won long before swords met shields, that the mind was a battlefield, and that fear was a weapon. They perfected intimidation through posture, unity through ritual, and dominance through silence. Their enemies looked into their eyes and saw no doubt, no confusion, no hesitation, only one thing: purpose, cold and absolute. In the violent theater of the Middle Ages, purpose was terrifying. What you are about to witness is not simply a historical narrative. It is the hidden architecture of their power. The 7 psychological tricks that bent kingdoms to their will, crushed morale before battles even began, and transformed the Brotherhood of Monks into a force that reshaped the medieval world. Their techniques carved a legend so deep that more than 8 centuries later, armies, strategists, and leaders still study their shadow. These were not ordinary knights, they were a living code of mental warfare wrapped in white mantles and crimson crosses. But before these 7 weapons of the mind can be revealed, you must understand the crucible in which they were forged. The Templars were not born from peace or prosperity. They emerged from chaos, superstition, and a world drowning in threats. They built an identity where weakness was not an error, right was impossible. From the moment a man joined their ranks, his name, his past, and his individuality were stripped away. He was rebuilt from the ground up into something far more powerful, a fragment of a collective will that tolerated no doubt and permitted no fear. The Templars engineered rituals that erased hesitation, symbols that commanded loyalty, and routines that hardened the spirit into iron. Their structure was designed to silence personal ego and amplify the mission above all else. And as these rituals took root, they created a phenomenon no medieval army could match: knights who did not fight for themselves, but for an idea so absolute that even death seemed secondary. To their enemies, this was not bravery. It was something more unsettling, something almost supernatural. And as you journey into the core of their psychological mastery, you will understand how this mindset became the invisible weapon that made the Order unstoppable. The deeper you travel into the forgotten corridors of medieval history, the clearer one truth becomes: the Templars did not rise to power by accident. Their influence, feared by kings and envied by rival orders, grew from a psychological structure crafted with precision. Every gesture, every silence, every ritual carried a purpose. They understood human nature with astonishing clarity. Fear, admiration, uncertainty, and devotion were resources to be shaped, sharpened, and wielded. Unlike other medieval armies, the Templars did not march as individuals bound loosely by loyalty. They moved as if powered by a single mind. Their discipline astonished allies and destabilized enemies long before the first strike. The way they rode into battle, impeccably aligned, silent, unbroken, felt less like a military formation and more like an omen. Chroniclers wrote about them with a mixture of awe and unease, describing their presence as something not entirely of this world. And in this introduction, you will step into the psychological chamber where the Order sculpted this terrifying aura, understanding the roots of a mental discipline that reshaped medieval warfare. Yet to truly grasp how 7 psychological tricks made the Order unstoppable, you must first understand the landscape of fear and faith that defined their world. Medieval Europe was a place where symbols carried more weight than laws, where silence could speak louder than declarations, and where an army's reputation could determine the outcome of a battle before either side advanced a single step. The Templars mastered this environment with a brilliance that bordered on manipulation. They knew that fear spreads faster than fire, that unity destroys confusion, and that the strongest weapon is not forged in iron, but in the mind. Through rituals that erased individual weakness, codes that enforced unwavering loyalty, and a culture where discipline was sacred, they became more than soldiers. They became a psychological phenomenon that enemies struggled to understand. Their power began long before war horses galloped and banners unfurled. It began in the minds of those who faced them, haunted by the reputation of an order that seemed to possess an invisible advantage. This introduction opens that hidden door and prepares you for the 7 psychological tools that raised the Templars above every army of their era. Among all the psychological weapons the Templars mastered, none was more devastating than their ability to move as a single, unbroken organism. In an age where armies often fractured under pressure, shouted conflicting commands, or dissolved into chaos when fear spread, the Templars stood as the complete opposite. They cultivated a unity so absolute that enemies often mistook their discipline for supernatural courage. When a Templar formation advanced, there were no scattered steps, no wandering eyes, no hesitation. Every night flowed with an almost ritualistic synchronicity. This was not instinctive, was conditioning, carefully crafted through years of training that dismantled individual impulses and rebuilt them into a collective identity. Witnesses describe them as one will, one breath, one blade, and that description reveals the psychological terror they instill. For to face an enemy that does not crack under pressure is to feel your own resolve break first. The Templars understood this intimately, and they engineered their unity to make opponents doubt themselves long before the first clash of steel. Their unbroken unity began in the mind, not on the battlefield. Every Templar lived under a strict code that eliminated distractions, ego, and personal ambition. They did not fight for glory, wealth, or their own legacy. They fought for the mission, and the mission alone. This mindset created a psychological stability that other armies could not imitate. When a Templar rode into combat, he knew the man beside him would never flee, never falter, never fail him. That certainty forged an emotional armor stronger than any shield. And when an entire formation shares that level of trust, fear loses its power. It wasn't their numbers that frightened enemies, it was their unity. The unsettling sense that each knight had already accepted whatever fate awaited him, whether victory or death. That kind of collective resolve creates a pressure that crushes the spirit of any army whose confidence wavers. The Templars weaponized loyalty, transforming it from a virtue into an instrument of psychological domination. But unity alone was not enough. The Templars elevated it into a performance and intentional display of synchronized motion designed to intimidate. When they charged, they did so in complete silence, an image so unnatural for medieval warfare that it shook the nerves of seasoned soldiers. Most armies relied on war cries to cover their fear. The Templars relied on stillness to expose the fear of others. This contrast created an atmosphere of dread, as if a force beyond human emotion was advancing. Enemies reported that they felt swallowed by a wall of purpose, unable to fracture the formation or even identify a moment of hesitation to exploit. And once the psychological balance tipped, the battle was effectively over. The enemy's mind broke before the enemy's line broke. That is why unity was not simply a tactic, it was a psychological weapon. The Templars understood that the most dangerous opponent is the one who appears unbreakable. And in the minds of medieval armies, no one embodied that image more powerfully than the warriors who marched beneath the Red Cross. Silence is usually seen as absence, but for the Templars, silence was a weapon, sharpened with purpose. In the chaos of medieval warfare where commanders shouted orders, soldiers roared to hide their fear, and metal clashed like thunder, the Templars removed all noise from their presence. They understood something their enemies did not. Sound reveals emotion, but silence hides intention. When a Templar unit advanced without a single cry, without a single word, without even the restless breathing of panic, it created a void that unsettled the mind. To witness an entire formation riding toward you in absolute stillness was to feel time slow down and courage drain from your chest. There were no insults to counter, no roars to outmatch, no signals to read. Only the approach of men who seemed untouched by fear. Medieval armies depended on sound for confidence. The Templars took sound away, leaving opponents face to face with their own anxiety. In a world where noise meant life, silence suddenly meant doom. This silence was not accidental, it was engineered. From the moment a knight joined the order, he was trained to discipline his breath, steady his heartbeat, and remove emotional expression from his posture. The Templars believed that inner stillness created outer dominance, and that a warrior who controlled himself controlled the battlefield. Their silence became a ritual, a mental shield that separated them from the confusion of war. And as they advanced in this eerie calm, their enemies had no idea which direction the attack would take, what strategy was unfolding, or even when the first strike would land. The absence of cues overwhelmed the senses, causing panic to rise internally without external pressure. Psychological warfare works best when the opponent defeats himself, and silence created the perfect environment for that collapse. Soldiers unaccustomed to such composure often broke formation before the fight even began, overwhelmed by the feeling that they were facing something not entirely human. But the true power of Templar silence came in the moment before impact. When most armies charged, the ground shook with screams meant to boost courage. The Templars, however, let the sound of hooves and armor speak for them, a cold, the mechanical rhythm that grew louder without emotion. It felt inevitable, like an executioner's step echoing down a stone hall. And at the exact moment their lances aligned for the strike, the silence shattered not with chaos, but with a single, unified cry of "No nobis Domini," shouted not in panic, but in declaration. This sudden explosion of sound, unleashed at the perfect psychological moment, hit harder than their weapons. Enemies felt ambushed by the intensity, losing their final foothold of courage. The Templars timed this transition with precision. Silence created dread. The sudden cry triggered shock, and the impact finished what fear had already begun. This mastery of silence, when to hold it, when to break it, and how to weaponize it became one of the most terrifying elements of their battlefield presence. In the end, armies were not defeated by Templar steel. They were defeated by Templar silence. Templar power did not begin on the battlefield. It began in the mind, molded through rituals that rewired every instinct a man possessed. These were not simple ceremonies, but psychological architectures designed to dismantle fear, erase ego, and forge a warrior who no longer reacted like ordinary soldiers. When a recruit crossed the threshold of the order, he underwent a transformation that medieval chroniclers struggled to describe. His personal identity dissolved into a greater purpose, his desires were silenced, and his routines were rebuilt into mechanisms of discipline so sharp they bordered on spiritual engineering. Every morning began with the same structured sequence of prayer, silence, preparation, and duty. Every night ended with reflection that stripped away hesitation and reinforced loyalty. Through repetition, the Templars created neural pathways of obedience and calm, conditioning themselves to respond to chaos with stillness and to uncertainty with ritualistic clarity. These habits did not simply prepare them for war, they prepared them for psychological dominance, creating men whose internal world was more fortified than any fortress they guarded. One of the most powerful aspects of these rituals was their ability to neutralize fear. Medieval warfare was filled with unpredictability, ambushes, disease, betrayal, and the constant presence of death. Most soldiers coped with these pressures through superstition or alcohol, but the Templars confronted them through structured discipline. Their prayers were not pleas for survival, they were affirmations of purpose. Their fasts were not punishments, they were exercises in self-control. Their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience were not symbolic, they were mental anchors, each one designed to eliminate a category of distraction that weakened ordinary men. A knight who owns nothing cannot fear loss. A knight who seeks no personal gain cannot be bribed. A knight who lives in obedience cannot be divided. These psychological principles made the Templars immune to many of the vulnerabilities that crippled other armies. Their rituals crafted a warrior who entered battle with no internal conflict, no emotional noise, and no hesitation that an enemy could exploit. But the true brilliance of these rituals was that they created a shared psychological identity. Every Templar repeated the same prayers, followed the same regulations, and observed the same silences. This consistency forged a collective mental environment where unity was not just encouraged, that was inevitable. When an entire order follows the same strict rhythm, the boundaries between individuals begin to fade. A Templar did not act alone. He acted as the physical extension of a centuries-old code drilled into his consciousness. This collective conditioning made them predictable to each other and unpredictable to their enemies. While other armies struggled with conflicting emotions, personal agendas, or wavering discipline, the Templars responded with uniform precision. Their rituals produced not only stronger individuals but an unbreakable psychological network, each night reinforcing the mindset of the next. By the time they faced an enemy, the battle was already influenced by this invisible structure of discipline. Templar rituals did not simply build warriors, they built a psychological machine, a disciplined organism capable of crushing armies long before steel met flesh. The Templars understood a truth that few medieval armies ever mastered. Presence is a weapon, not strength, not numbers. Presence. The way a warrior carries himself can fracture an opponent's confidence before any sword is drawn, and the Templars cultivated a presence so controlled, so unwavering, that it radiated a silent warning across the battlefield. Their posture was rigid but calm, their gaze steady but hollow of fear, their movements precise as if guided by a force beyond human hesitation. To stand in front of a Templar formation was to face men who appeared carved from stone. Men whose confidence did not rise or fall with the situation, but remained eerily consistent. Chroniclers wrote that their presence felt untouched by death, as if fear could not find a place to settle inside them. This aura was no accident, it was the result of conditioning, ritual, and a deep psychological transformation that made each knight believe his life belonged to something far greater than himself. And that belief, absolute and unshakable, created an atmosphere that opponents struggled to withstand. What separated the Templars from other warriors was not only their courage, but the way they projected it. While most armies revealed their anxiety through trembling hands, shifting stances, or restless glances, the Templars hid every sign of fear behind a disciplined mask. In medieval combat, even a brief flicker of uncertainty could spread like a plague across an army, weakening morale and opening gaps for the enemy to exploit. The Templars eliminated that vulnerability by training themselves to remain emotionally still under pressure. Whether facing overwhelming odds or a straightforward skirmish, they preserved the same controlled posture, one hand firm on the sword, the other steady on the shield, eyes fixed ahead without wavering. This consistency made them appear invincible. Soldiers on the opposing side would look at these knights and feel a slow, creeping doubt. If they are not afraid, should I be? And once doubt enters the mind of a warrior, fear soon follows. The Templars didn't need to shout or threaten. Their presence whispered a message louder than any battle cry. We do not break. In the medieval world, that message shattered armies. but their aura extended beyond the battlefield. Even in diplomatic settings, patrols, or simple interactions with civilians, the Templars radiated an intimidating calm. Their uniformity, identical mantles, identical equipment, identical posture gave them an otherworldly appearance, as if they were manifestations of an idea rather than individual men. Their white mantles symbolized purity, their red cross symbolized sacrifice, and their silence symbolized discipline. Everything about their visual identity was carefully curated to strike the imagination, reminding both allies and enemies that they represented more than an order, they represented an unbreakable vow. And that vow was visible in every breath they took. In a time when charisma and intimidation were as valuable as swords, the Templars wielded presence with the precision of a blade. They stepped onto the battlefield with a confidence born not from ego but from unity, ritual, and purpose. This aura of fearless presence created a psychological imbalance that many armies could not overcome. The Templars faced death not as a threat but as a step toward their mission's fulfillment. And when your enemy believes that nothing can defeat him, the battle is already slipping away. Their presence was not just felt, it was feared. And fear, in the medieval world, decided everything. Pain breaks ordinary men, but for the Templars, pain was transformed into a tool of psychological mastery. They understood that the body's suffering could either weaken the mind or forge it into something unrecognizable. And so, through relentless training, strict discipline, and unwavering ritual, the Templars conditioned themselves to interpret pain not as a threat, but as proof of purpose. Every drill they performed, every hour spent in armor under the scorching sun, every wound carried from battle became a silent reminder that endurance was their true advantage. Most medieval soldiers feared pain because it signaled danger and the potential loss of life. The Templars eliminated that association. They reprogrammed their minds through constant exposure to physical and emotional strain, teaching themselves that pain was not a barrier, it was a threshold. And once a man crosses that threshold enough times, he becomes capable of confronting terrors that break others instantly. This mental conditioning created warriors who could charge through wounds, ignore fatigue, and continue fighting even when outnumbered or overwhelmed, leaving their enemies stunned by their unnatural resilience. Their conditioning, however, did not stop at physical endurance. Templars were trained to endure emotional and psychological hardship with equal strength. They lived under vows that removed comfort, luxury, and personal indulgence. They slept in modest quarters, ate simple meals, and followed rigid routines that left no room for weakness or hesitation. This lifestyle stripped away attachments that could distract or destabilize the mind. While other warriors carried the burden of family, wealth, or pride, the Templars carried nothing but duty. Their detachment from worldly concerns allowed them to focus completely on their mission, creating a mental clarity that made them nearly impossible to intimidate. Even torture, a method widely used in medieval conflicts, lost much of its effectiveness against them. Chroniclers recorded cases where captured Templars remained silent under unbearable suffering, their discipline so profound that it terrified their captors. To break the mind of a man who has trained himself to embrace pain is to face a psychological wall too high for manipulation to climb. And in an era where fear was the most common weapon, the Templars rendered it useless. The most remarkable aspect of their conditioning was the collective strength it produced. When an entire group shares the same relationship with pain, seeing it as a test rather than a threat, the battlefield becomes an environment where fear cannot spread. One Templar's endurance inspired the next, creating a chain reaction of resolve that radiated through their formations. Enemies witnessed this with disbelief. They saw Templars continue fighting with arrows embedded in their armor, with shattered shields, with blood running down their mantles, and instead of retreating, these knights pressed forward as if injury only fueled their determination. This defiance of pain was not bravado. It was the result of years of internal conditioning. The Templars trained to welcome the discomfort that others avoided, and in doing so, they gained psychological dominance. For when you face an enemy who does not fear suffering, you face an enemy who cannot be controlled. Their ability to transform pain into power was more than endurance, it was a psychological revolution that reshaped what it meant to be unstoppable. And in the medieval world, where fear ruled every battlefield, the Templars became the only force that fear could not claim. The 7 psychological weapons of the Templar Order reveal a truth that history often hides. Power is not forged only in steel, but in the invisible architecture of the human mind. Long before their swords were raised, the Templars had already conquered the battlefield through discipline, ritual, silence, presence, unity, and a relationship with pain that ordinary warriors could not comprehend. Their dominance was not accidental. It was engineered with the precision of a belief system capable of reshaping a man from the inside out. And because of this, their influence survived long after their fortresses fell, long after kings betrayed them, long after their leaders were burned at the stake. What made the order unstoppable did not vanish with their destruction. It became part of military doctrine, psychological warfare, and the modern understanding of resilience. Their legacy reminds us that the greatest victories are won in the realm of the mind. where fear is defeated long before the enemy appears. They were more than knights, they were a living blueprint of how purpose can transform human potential into force. And that blueprint still whispers through the corridors of time. As we close this journey, one truth remains unshaken. The Templars became legends not because they sought immortality, but because they lived with a purpose so absolute that history could not silence it. Their rituals shaped discipline, their silence shaped fear, their unity shaped victory, and their presence shaped the imagination of entire civilizations. To study them is to understand that every era produces warriors, but only a few produce symbols, and the Templars became exactly that. Their story is not merely about crusades or medieval battles. It is about the psychological mastery that allowed them to stand firm when others broke, to confront chaos with order, and to transform suffering into strength. This legacy belongs not only to the past but to anyone who seeks to command their own mind with the same precision. And in understanding their methods, one thing becomes clear. True power is not given, it is built, cultivated, and defended from within. If you reached this final moment, you already stand among the few who truly grasp the force behind the Templars' psychological power. Their discipline, silence, unity, and presence echo across centuries, reminding us that knowledge is a weapon. If this journey moved you, stay with us and continue exploring the truths history tried to bury. Your support keeps this legacy alive. Subscribe, activate notifications, and leave a comment telling us which Templar mindset struck you the most. Your voice helps the algorithm push these stories to those who value depth and mystery. Before you leave, remember, every like strengthens this mission, every comment keeps the Order alive, and every share expands this knowledge. Carry this story forward. Share it with someone who loves powerful histories. The Order rides again, and now, with you.